Okay, so I guess to introduce myself, so I'm Gillian Russell. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at SFU. But I come to it I was a designer in industry for a really long time, and then I lived in the UK for an even longer time. So I used to design speedboats. That's actually to the world of design. And then moved to the UK. I was sort of disenfranchised by industry, moved to the UK, ended up starting my own company around critique of design, right at the early days of critical design, got into that side of the field, and then went back and did a PhD at the Royal College of Art. Sort of got me back into academia. I came back to Canada, taught at Emily Carr for a while. Now I'm finished. So that's kind of my intro. So today, Jihyun and I, so Jihyun will be presenting after me. We're doing sort of a half and half. We both are members of the Imaginative Methods Lab, which is the research lab that I run in the School of Interactive Arts. So we've titled our talk Designing Data Fluencies. I'm 100% sure we're going to get to the data fluencies part specifically, but it's actually the name of a research stream. We run two big streams in the lab right now. One of them is data fluencies and one of them is ocean futures. But both of them are really looking at different ways to creatively and imaginatively kind of engage literacies around sort of large scale impacts and problematics in the world. One of them being sort of digital, data-based, one of them being design. But before I begin, I'll give you a bit of an intro on Imaginative Methods Lab. So our lab is a design-based research studio. It is a studio. At CIAT, we're only allowed to call things labs. And so it's a lab, but it's actually a studio. For what we do is called participatory futuring. And so I'm a co-founder and director of the lab, along with my colleague, Frederick Lesage, who's a social scientist from the School of Communication at SFU as well. And we're based out of Simon Fraser in the city of Surrey, which lies on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Katzie, Kwantlen, Wetland, Cookite, Semiahmoo, Musqueam, Swasin, and the First Stolen Nations. So our work in the lab is very much focused on exploring kind of new territories for a more democratized futures practice. We work with a variety of publics to better understand the entangled complexities of the problems we face and to kind of collectively imagine, prototype, and experience possible future scenarios that offer alternatives to the status quo. So the goal is to kind of build people's capacities to make sense of complex situations by offering new ways of seeing the present while thinking about the future in new ways. So when we're talking about the future, we're sort of leaning on theorists like Elizabeth Gross, who sort of talks about this notion of the future as that openness of becoming that enables divergences from what exists. And so it's effectively a refusal to the resignation of what is. So it's not future as more of the same, it's future as something different, another form of possibility. And it's for being able to kind of think and act otherwise. And so this definition of futures runs counter to what many futuring practices that you might be more familiar with. So think of risk assessors, trend forecasters, policymakers, strategic planners. These futures thinkers tend to conceive of the future, the sort of singular future, in terms of business modeling, engineering, and marketing, largely treat futuring as a top-down anticipatory practice based on regimes of diagnosis, counting, and accounting. So they bring forth future visions that foreclose alternatives and prescribe a very particular future that holds in place existing infrastructures and ways of being. So that by now, I would hope that many of us are well aware of damaging ourselves and our planets. Capitalism, neoliberalism, consumerism, individualism. This leads to a mutilated idea of the future based on this kind of straight line extrapolation of the present. So if we keep doing things in the exact same ways, we're not actually bringing futures forward, we're bringing more presence. We're just living in a perpetual present. So basically what we do in the IML is that we design, or we use design as this tactic to unveil many of the hidden realities that hold in place our current ways of being. So as a way to kind of disentangle or just kind of get into the mix of these taken for granted, to unveil them so people can start to see that these are not the only way things can be. These givens are actually their own forms of social imaginaries. And we do this as a way to engage publics to better see and understand the kind of entangled structures attached to a problem in an effort to kind of build literacies around our large scale problems so that we can together work towards change. And so our idea is that designers should not be the experts in the room building futures for everybody else, but that we need to all come together to build futures collectively. And so it's kind of this shift from this top down to a bottom up approach to both design and futuring. So a lot of this ties into this idea and this premise of what's called like an ontological design, which Anne-Marie Willis put forth and is now sort of touted by quite a few anthropologists and other designers in the field, which fundamentally is effectively this notion that we design our world while our world acts back on us and design us. So it's this idea like we make things and things in return make us. So you look at your iPhone, prime example, right? We put an iPhone into the world. How has that changed us? It's massively changed us. We are completely different people. We structure our worlds, we structure our relationships, we structure everything differently because of that device. And so again, we make things and things make us. And so it starts with this recognition that by designing tools, we are designing ways of being. So, and therefore, in order for us to strive towards a more equitable world, then we really believe that all people should be involved in shaping it. So again, we're going away from this top-down expert notion to this idea that we have to collectively come together to build the futures that we want. And the deliberate part is really important here because whether we realize it or not, we all shape it. But it's about bringing intentionality back into that equation. And so this again ties into this concept or concept and what's happening in research, because of course I'm an academic and I sit in a research institution, of a move away from this notion of research as a reserve of the expert towards what Bruno Latour defines as the co-researcher. And there are other theorists, Arjun Padarai talks about the rights to research. There are many people right now talking about the shift that needs to happen within the field itself. And so in an article in 2011 on rules of method for the new socioscientific experiments, Latour states, we are all engaged into the collective experiments on matters as different as climate, food, landscape, health, urban design, technical communication, and so on. As consumers, militants, citizens, we are all now co-researchers. There's a difference to be sure between all of us, but not the difference between knowledge producers and those who are bombarded by their applications. So it's time, according to that tool, that we have a collective say on the innovations in our world and decide for ourselves what is good for us. And so those are sort of the kind of the primary or the base fundamental theories that sort of ground what we do in the lab and how we really think and understand design. And so what I'm going to do for the kind of duration of my part of this is talk to maybe two projects if I have time that starts to kind of elucidate what this looks like in practice. And so the projects I'll speak to, well as Jihyun, fall under this idea of data fluencies. And so it's this project that we've been running in the lab. It's a Mellon-funded project that's really looking at moving away from this idea of literacy with its focus on kind of reading and writing well within and thus implicitly accepting the boundaries of our data-filled world, towards cultivating the creative and imaginative capacities to both grapple with the complexities of data systems and rewrite the scripts we are given. So it's really like teasing out this idea when we talk about data literacies, and we always work with publics, and we work a lot with youth, in particular with this project. And a lot of what's happening, at least in Vancouver, but I do across BC, and I know it's happening across Canada and beyond, is that when we're talking about teaching youth about sort of data and digital and literacy, we're really talking about teaching them. You're not talking about getting them to better understand the relationships they're forming with these tools, or this notion that we make things like us. What happens when we engage, when we're literally spending all of our time double mediated through these devices? How does that change who we are? And so what we're trying to do is move away from this notion of literacy, this reading and writing, which really does fundamentally imply that you accept the conditions you are in and you're learning how to work within them, to this notion of fluency. How can we creatively and imaginatively build capacities to both grapple with these complexities of data systems, but also be able to rewrite the script? That's kind of fundamental. So the kind of big outcome from this project is actually going to happen this summer. We partnered with the Vancouver Public Library. We're running a free public night school for data fluencies, where we'll be running a lot of the tools we've been developing over the 3 years for members of the public to come test their hands out. Some stuff. And then we also have an exhibition at the Orr Gallery opening May 25th, where a lot of the work will show. And the BPL is also going to attached to the next solution. So the first project I want to talk to you about is called Fables for Imagining. So this project's been ongoing since 2019, but has really kind of built up since we've been working on this project. And so what this is, or what the point of this project was, is this idea that we were critically looking at, again, this idea of who gets to tell stories around tech, right? We have tech entrepreneurs, we have marketing, we have all of these different people. We have tech hype, which is the biggest one, right? Which is it is fantasy that's sort of told to us as reality. We see it all the time about how these things are going to change the world, make everything better, so on and so forth. You know what tech hype is. And so instead of sort of a tech metaphor as, the cloud, they have these illusions out there and people subscribe to them. They have a really hard time being able to imagine the reality of those systems because the metaphors are so strong and so intentional that we're actually removed from any realities of these systems. So we wanted to see, was there ways to develop methods that could help people be able to story with technology, story with data, story, forms of kind of digital fluencies, critical digital literacies, whatever you want to call them. So we looked at this notion of fables because fables have been, there's a historic understanding of the fable as being this kind of device to share tales of moral inquiry and caution. They're drawing on kind of archetypal characters to build collective wisdom, interrogate power, and navigate societal roles and responsibilities. Across generations and cultures, these narratives encapsulate sort of profound truths about human nature, ethics, and society. They serve as reflective mirrors of societal norms, values, and power structures, offering insightful commentary on contemporary issues. And so even the idea of fables we thought was a really interesting trope to dock into, to be able to kind of play around in this space, moving away from sort of what happened in the kind of late 1800s, early 1900s, where fables became really devices to be able to teach people how they should behave. The moral of the story is X. That is not typically what morals are ever about. And there's a long history to them that's far more sort of insightful and imaginative, impactful. And so what we've designed is this three-part story making tool that actually helps participants be able to write their own techno-social, 21st century techno-social fable about the relationships that they have with technology. And so we've run this almost probably 70 times since its sort of original incarnation all across. We've run it in Europe and here in the States. And the initial part kind of changes depending on the intentionality of what we're doing. And so sometimes we're looking at social media platforms, sometimes we're looking at storing tech metaphors. It kind of changes. Right now, we're actually running a whole program with Muslim community working around being able to write fables that counters the disinformation that are coming across news media. So it's being used for various different ways, but again, as a mechanism to allow people to kind of build these sort of collective stories to kind of infiltrate back into our world. And so the way the tool works, this is the story playing mat. It's got a mat, it's got archetype cards, fable cards, and then again, the kind of systems or platform. So stage one, teams get together and they sort of unpack their cards, looking at, and we've played around with this typical SWOT analysis. Now we're calling it SWOP analysis, so the strengths, weaknesses, antagonists, and protagonists of a platform. They start to break down kind of what those actually are within the given platform they're actually wanting to tell a story about. It's really getting them to start to think about, what does this platform do for good and for ill? How has it changed the world around us? How has it changed us, our patterns of behavior? We work with each of the teams to try and tease out some of the unintended consequences across these platforms, not necessarily what they are originally intended to do, but what they have actually become when put into the world. And then after that, you can see they go down and they start to actually map out the various different stories they've been telling to each other about their use or their relationship to these platforms. And this is based on Dan Harmon's The Shape of Stories. And so he believes there's sort of 8 quintessential shapes to stories. And it's looking at kind of a protagonist journey from beginning to end as it goes through map moments of kind of fortune or misfortune. So they map out kind of shapes to their various stories to get, again, a better sense of the tempo and sort of the actual feel for the story they might want to tell. Phase 2, they're then given, they get to choose the types of archetypes that they want to attach to their sort of protagonists and antagonists. And this can be anything from the algorithm, the CEO of a company, some troll who's on, it can be anything. It's thinking really beyond just this idea of actual people. And so then they map out, they take 2 character cards or archetype cards, and then they start to actually give them characteristics. So, you have a lion, but you have a brave lion or a cowardly lion, or, you start to dig deeper into what those actual characteristics are. And from there, then they're sort of, again, mapping out these characteristics, finding their shapes a little bit more. But in the final stage, they're actually given, and we've been working really long, and we do a lot of this work in the lab about this notion of scaffolding. How do you take people to unveil the taken for granted with the things we don't see? It's very difficult to just say, imagine this. It's not very easy to do that. So we've been working on these notions of how do you scaffold people from where they're at to be able to look back, to be able to kind of future forward. And so one of the things for fable writing we found really early on is even if you get people to be able to unpack and tell stories about their relationships to technology, it is very difficult for them to write a fable. It is not easy to just start writing something that's strong and is actually even the thing you want to be writing. And so this final stage that we've done is, so once you have your 2 archetype cards, then you are given a sampling of fables that we have kind of amassed from all over the world. And so say if you have a turtle archetype in phase 2, then you'd be given the option to misread either Urashima and the Turtle, a Japanese story, or the Eagle and the Turtle, which is an ancient Greek story. And so this section is about purposely miswriting. And so you're actually given a fable that has your archetypes within it to read, to better understand it, to kind of familiarize yourself with how fables are written, what are the common tropes that they use. And you can use that as your jumping off point to then start writing your own, to start kind of switching in and out what parts of that fable apply to how you want to tell your story. What we have found, literally right across the board, is that it really helps people write, but they never use anything from it. It just gives them the confidence to be able to actually get their story out. And so after that, the fables are brought back to the Imaginative Methods Lab where we illustrate them. And then we send them back to the participants. So they have their own story that's been illustrated, and then they get them back. If it's in a larger workshop, we usually will create a tiny scene with all the fables that were amassed during that particular workshop. So they get a little book. And we're also collecting them back at the IML because we're eventually going to make a full book of 21st century technical that they all get a copy of, but then we'll also okay, so I read one of these. Okay, so I brought 2. So this is one of them. So the rabbit and the earthworm, and it's an Instagram story. Kind of get interest of what it might do. But one of the ones that I think is particularly interesting. So this one, which is The Blind Bull and the Ants, a story of autonomous vehicles, was written by Sam Barnett, Denise Torr, and Semyon Shamshir for a workshop that we ran that was, again, it slightly took a twist on the original, and it was looking at new metaphors of technology. So we were actually writing a chapter for a book on we need new metaphors of tech. And our argument was that we don't need new metaphors. People just need to better understand what's happening, what the metaphors are doing, and how do we unpack metaphors to see what they're actually doing. So we ended up running a version of this to start to see how that might look in practice. This was one of the stories that came out that was about the story of the autonomous vehicle. So Blind Bull and the Ants. So one morning, Bull woke up in the field, unable to see. Worried he would no longer be able to feed himself and defend his territory, he bellowed in fear. Crinkle, crackle, an ant whispered in his ear. Let us be your eyes. We will ease your suffering and guide you to food and safety. Bull thanked the ants, putting his trust in their hands. As months passed, the ants guided Bull in circles around the pasture, always promising that sustenance and security were just beyond the next hill. One day, plagued with exhaustion, thirsty and hungry from his endless travels, Bull collapsed to the ground, unable to carry on. This is as far as we can take you, said the ants. Bull, panicking from the idea of being left blinded and alone, begged for their continued guidance. Please don't leave me. I can't live without your help. Shaking his head in utter disillusionment, Bull's sight suddenly began to return. As he shook away the last of the ants from his eyes, he realized it was they who had kept him from seeing all along. As Bull watched the army of ants hurrying away, he found himself gazing at the skeletal remains of his legs. How could you leave me like this? Wailed Bull, enraged by his newfound knowledge of the ants' deceit. We were only trying to help. And so this is a story that they wrote, and it was about them really unpacking this notion of what happens with autonomy and this illusion, that this thing is going to do it for ourselves, and what happens when we give up our agency to a device that we don't actually even have any form of relationship with. And what are we giving in exchange? And so they ended up writing this fable, which sort of talks about this, kind of really teases out this blind faith, and then the sort of the duping that can come from the other side, that we really are left sort of in the lurch. And so it's a really interesting sort of, and every time it works incredibly well, shockingly. Are always still baffled by it. The stories that people have been telling, and we have now probably over maybe 55 stories that we've collected throughout all the different events, really tell, like across them all, this really broad story of people's different understandings, relationships, for good and bad. We have one story that was written, we've read it with youth too, that was written about the spider and a chicken. And it was effectively the story of his mom not letting him play video games. But video games were his only way of having friends. It's the only way he felt connected. It was the only thing. And that she just didn't understand. And in the end, it was such a sad story. But when the mom read it, she was like, oh, he's never been able to articulate this to me, but I can totally see what's happening in the story. And so it's allowing us to, again, be the owners of our own stories, as opposed to having these stories put on us from industry, from technology, from people who don't really care about us. They only want our money. Okay, do I have time for a second?
So you could go.
So this is a project we're running as we speak. And so we're doing this one particularly with the Girl Guides of Canada. So we were invited to do a project with them. They asked us to come to help them start to figure out ways that they could build kind of digital literacies for Girl Guides. And so we were challenging them to kind of move a little bit beyond just digital literacies and really look at futures literacies, which Vanessa was saying is one of the most important skill sets that we can have in the 21st century. And so we have are developing, but we started running it, this badge in a box, which is a very Girl Guide thing, where you effectively create a whole activity set in a box that any of the troop leaders can use. They can run it with their girls. And in the end, if the girls sort of hit all the activities, they get a badge out of it. So it's kind of a standard Girl Guide thing. So this particular one, what we are doing is looking at, so you can kind of see on the left-hand side here. We've been amassing a futures database for a really long time that is sort of scraped from many of these future forecasting companies that will put together sort of what is next for technology. And they do it within the near future, the far future, and kind of the future. And we've been collecting them, and we use these as kind of jumping off points. So we will pick a few of them, we'll give them to the girls, and then they are invited to kind of unpack what this future, what this prediction, the world that it will bring forward. So again, we make things like us. So, smart fridges, bossware for kids, all of these different kind of things, we get them. We have lots of kind of tools to help them be able to kind of world build off of this. We get them to start to look at how this one particular future, the types of worlds it might bring forward. And that's kind of the basics. So I'm going to give you one example as we go through. So this group had cyborg jellyfish that help explore oceans autonomously. And so jellyfish are abundant, efficient swimmers, but their natural speed is inefficient for ocean exploration. A team of scientists have implemented electrodes into jellyfish, enabling them to swim 3 times faster with minimal energy use. These cyborgs could revolutionize deep sea exploration, and while jellyfish don't feel ethical concerns about modifying living organisms persist. And so this is one of the futures that we've been collecting, and it's saying it should happen around 2025 to 2050. We'll have these cyborg jellyfish living around our oceans. And so the girls, start to world build around this. We have also been creating short stories that go along with each of these futures to, again, depending on the age group that we're working with, help them sort of flesh out some of this world building that goes for this particular badge in a box. We then go, they get the worlds, and then they start to imagine effectively, in this future world, people would have different experiences, challenges, and skills than their own. So choose one lens. So, there was the education, environmental, social, cultural lenses from the front, and then create a list of the skills people might need in this future, things they might discover and learn, and issues they might take action against. And so we're using the scaffolding that Girl Guides already use for their typical badge programs, but we're sort of flipping it to get them to see future worlds what you might need. And what they do in the end is they create a skill. They pick a skill that they think people might need or an activity, and then they actually create their own badges. And so these are the two that came from that particular future forecast. One was become a super tuna explorer. So Pathfinders will explore deeper ethical concerns and gain hands-on experience with marine bioengineering concepts. These are the activities they would have to do to get their badge. So learn about what makes super tuna different from wild tuna and understand how the genetic modifications make super tuna resilient. Learn about fish drones and how they influence fish migrations, and build and program a remote controlled underwater fish drone. That was one of the group of girls came up with this. The other one was create your own jellyfish paste. So Pathfinders will gain hands-on experience in transforming marine biomass into a sustainable protein source, contributing to global food security. So learn about the history of jellyfish deserts of the 2040s, visit one of the giant floating factories to see how jellyfish are combined with krill and lanternfish to create nutrient paste, and learn how to collect jellyfish without damaging the ecosystem, and participate in simulating jellyfish foraging activity and create a small batch of jellyfish paste following the guided recipe. And so that's how they would gain their badges. At the end of the activity, they actually get to design their own badges. So these are the two badges that the girls group designed to go with those particular futures. This is the I made jellyfish paste. This is the super tuna explorer. And then we bring them back to the lab, and then we've been making them. So this is the first one. This was my octopus teacher. The other ones, we haven't made these two yet. And then they get them back with these report cards, as if those swim report cards, and say we've done these activities, check, signature with their badges on them. And then they get to take them home. And so it's a way to sort of use the tropes of the Girl Guides that they're very familiar with, but flip it so that it's actually building out a better understanding of how futuring is happening to us right now and how we can engage in those spaces. And so instead of letting these companies decide these futures, sell them to companies who then make them a reality before we're ever introduced into this equation, it allows us to start to see what's happening behind the scenes, be sort of more literate to it, and then hopefully take those next steps to be more hopeful and make change. Okay, that's it for me.
Thank you so much. Now, hey, so I think because we're going a little bit over time, maybe we can hold questions at the end and we can schedule some time. Welcome, Jihyun. Please, let's welcome her. She deserves.
Okay. So, hi everyone. So my name is Jihyun Park, and I also work at the Imaginative Methods Lab. Actually, Gillian is my supervisor for my PhD study. And I also teach at Northeastern University as a sessional instructor here for information design and data visualization. So my background is communication design, and so I've been trying to use information and communication design combining with the social practice to bring more social changes, like what Gillian did. Yeah. Okay. So I think that was my short introduction about myself. So this is one of our lab project, and then also about my PhD study. So the topic is data by me, UNS, exploring transformable and relational data for eco-social changes. Yeah, so before I start, I want to pose the question here. What is data? Because usually after talking about my research, people ask this question a lot to me. And usually I feel embarrassed because it's a huge question. So this time I just put this question here at the beginning. And then so think about this question while you're listening to my talk today. And so yeah, what do you think what data is? Numbers or graph and chart are data? Yeah, maybe. Also maybe story information, can it be data? Maybe. Oh, it's blank, invisible. So maybe something in your mind, like your perspective, your thought, your emotion, can they be data? Think about it, and then we'll get back to it later. So okay, so I'll start by introducing data feminism. It's Hugh's theory that I got inspiration a lot from this. So I'm starting explaining by this. So it's from Donna Haraway and Catherine D'Ignazio. So how do we usually create data? So usually there is a researcher who collects the data, but here, when this person collects the data, he heavily relies on his own belief or his own perspective. He picks up data that he thinks is important, which generates a partial perspective on data. So it's actually pretty biased because the data selection was based on his belief. After that, he represents his data and put them into the world. And people take those data and it becomes universal truth, magic, which means we end up believing actually the researchers believe. Also, what happens in this process, there are other sections that were marginalized because the researchers' point of view, they were not important. But what if it was important information for other groups, right? So this was the limitation from top-down approach. I think the Gillian explained that also in her talk, right? Top-down approach in data practice. So, and if we zoom in this, that the bottom circle area, what happens here is citizens are alienated in this data practice. They just adopt the data without questioning, believing of the data they are taking is objective and universal truth. And there is no engagement with the data, although this data might be related to their socio-political system or ecological cultural system. Also, it doesn't capture knowledge in citizens' lived experience or community-based knowledge. So to address this issue, citizen science emerged. In citizen science, citizens collect the data, and the academic government organization use this data for their science research or policy making. So it's bottom-up process. So our research team wanted to delve into this process. We investigated one of the citizen science project called Ocean-Wise Shoreline Cleanup Activity. In this activity, citizen participants clean and collect debris around shorelines, and they transform them into data. But after observations of participants, we discovered that this activity heavily relies on the quantitative data collection. So participants count, measure, and categorize what they collect. So it was an inherently functional approach to generating data. But actually, at the bottom, this data is linked to many other broader contexts, such as why these debris came here and how it impacts marine life living in this area. It fails to capture these situational responses. Instead, it simplifies complex realities into numerical forms, eventually becoming factual information. In this process, participants lose their internal and experiential interconnections, particularly how their own plastic behavior relate to the data. So to explore more about our findings, we designed the prop kit to gain deeper feedback and insight from participants. The kit aimed to understand how participants understand, reflect on, and share their stories, experience about debris. This is a prop kit we designed. It has several activities. We were trying to find some other ways than the quantitative approaches. So we provided different ways of documenting the debris and encouraged them to write their reflection on it. Also, several activities to think and write about the relationship between humans and ocean. And another activity for writing a letter to the ocean. So I didn't include all the activities, but likely through diverse activities, we try to extract participants' thoughts, perspective, and reflections. We distributed this kit to around 20 participants. So after reviewing their responses from ProKit, we found that participants who reflected more deeply on debris felt a stronger personal connection to it. So instead of focusing on factual information, there might be ways to capture participants' internal experiential and situational responses by fostering their engagement and reflection. We might be able to strengthen interconnection and reflexivity in data. Oh, my mouse is working here. Okay, I can point it better. So able to strengthen interconnection and reflexivity in data and bring changes in participants. To explore this, I invited other graduate students, include me. It was 5 graduate students. We tracked our plastic use for 3 weeks. And while we are tracking, we developed data concept and method together to explore ways to increase reflexivity and interconnection with data. So we developed 3 data concepts and methods, which are data biography, data persona, and data embodying. So data biography draws on the concept from Ignacio. It narrates various aspects of data, such as plastic item that relates to place and context, and how it relates to our behaviors, how it impacts to ecological social systems. Also, we observed recurring patterns such as behaviors, items, and routines relate to the data. So, for example, participant narrated, I used to frequently use take-out coffee, discarding many disposal cups. The plastic I discard will seep into the ground and persist for a long time. So after that, based on this, data persona was to analyze the recurring patterns. We realized that actually the patterns from data biographies represent ourselves, like such as individuals' daily life, lifestyle, or consumption pattern, and even the identity. So for example, these participants, through the data biography, she realized that I spend many hours outside, leading a busy lifestyle that relies heavily on convenient food and drink, and I don't cook often, which makes her to use more plastic. So based on this insight, inspired by Haraway's concept bodily production, we developed data embodying method that generates reflections and emotions around data and related behaviors. So as you can see at the pink area, the realization from data persona was transformed into deep reflection and emotions. and eventually triggered motivation to act differently and broad potential to changes of their behaviors. For example, they started to make alternative actions such as using a tumbler, making juice at home, and carrying on their takeout container. During 3 weeks, we mapped out all data from the whole tracking process, such as reflections, emotions, awareness, realizations, plastic knowledge regained while tracking, and actions. While tracking, we also met together every week and did collective mapping to share each participant's experience and reflections on their data. We realized that it helps to motivate them to act more and find similar behavior patterns within participants. It also supported creating of common values they want to pursue together. So after mapping, we transformed the map into visualization forms to analyze the journey we went through. So here, these are the plastic. So this plastic uses, you can see that eventually it reduced through various experiential elements such as awareness, reflections, emotions, knowledge, and actions. This is another participant visualization. I also put them together to see how they influence and relate to each other. This was the visualization focusing on the reflection and action threads. So, and finally, based on this journey, I developed the concept transformable data inspired by Joe Bate concept data journey. So this is the internal space of oneself. As you can see here, it started with plastic data. And through data biography, persona, and embodying, it was continuously transforming into different forms by friction and mutation with experiential elements. It eventually motivates changes in behaviors and contributes to plastic reduction here. Also changes in relationally between data and participant. So here back to this question. So after that, my view of data becomes rather than defining what data is actually transformable. Data is medium to trigger change based on reflexivity, interconnection, your reflection, your emotion, your action. Also then, what is visualization? So this top one, this is the user approach, how we visualize, right? You remember the top-down approach. Do you and then it has the same process. So research collects data and visualize them, and it goes to the audience. So here the visualization needs to be very accessible because it's for everyone. Everyone needs to understand it, right? So in order to do that, it uses simple figures or common method to visualize it. And by doing that, actually it reduces many information and it becomes universal. So here the visualization is for everyone. But in our collective visualization, it's backward. So the audience comes here, right, at the beginning. We collect the data together, we map that data together, and the visualization goes back to them to understand deeply how their journey went through and what are discoveries from that process. So in this process, audience become experts about the topic they are exploring. So here visualization is for us, for the specific audience group. Okay, so back to our research. Following our plastic tracking journey, we co-designed the plastic tracking kit for other citizens to use. We tested it and applied the methods we developed so far into the kit. So we developed 3 weeks kit and simplified some of the activities into 3 days kit. 3 weeks kit has weekly activities, data cards, action cards, and my plastic diary. In the 3 days kit, it includes the activities of plastic contact and waste. So they are tracking their plastic use and documenting what they use. And then through this plastic personal activity, they are finding their recording patterns and narrate their reflections and emotions on it. So next, I'll talk about relational data. So this hasn't been researched, but I'll introduce some of the concepts and methods I've been developing. So back to the transformable data. So one thing I discovered after the research, data practice actually can trigger changes of relationship. For example, at the beginning, the plastic for the participant was just convenient product. And then after the practice, they started to see plastic as something to reduce to help environment. So the relationship between the plastic and the participant was changed, and I wanted to look into this relationality in depth for my next stage. So here in this picture, the pink area, my assumption is that data can occur between the relationships, which can be incorporating with experiential elements and participants' behaviors. So here, this person has relationship with so many entities, includes human debris and non-human entities. So relational data is to look at, for example, how this person builds relationships with these entities and how data occurs from these relationships and how those data can trigger changes of relationship. And these relationships can encounter another relationships by assembling. So assemblage is a concept that highlights how meaning, function, and identity emerge from these relationships rather than being inherent to like individual fixed objects. So within assemblages, their meaning and influence heavily depends on how they interact with other elements. For example, the plastic water bottle in this assemblage, it interact with the laptop, mobile phone, and desk as means of a convenient bottle for drinking water. And at this assemblage, where non-human species are having relationships and interacting each other, when it encounters the plastic water bottle, the meaning and function of this water bottle change. In this assemblage, this bottle doesn't function as a bottle anymore, and the meaning has changed to a thing that pollutes the marine environment. So the assemblage has changed. The context has changed, and the relationship between each entity has changed. Also, from each entity's perspective, it can have different meaning. So I see this part as a potential area to research further. So I've been exploring how humans can become active participants in this assembling process as one of entities, deepening relationships and their understanding of these connections. To explore this, I am planning to develop a data-driven relationship building kit. It uses data from relationship within assemblage In order to do that, I've been developing the method multi-species ethnography from Kixay and Hamrick concept and exploring it further based on Bonnet's concept phenomenology of perception, which highlights the sensory and situational experience. Also using PropKit method to develop multi-species persona diary that non-human entities centered and explore how they tie to the current realities. And additionally, using design fiction as a method to imagine alternative stories based on non-human persona stories. So we explore transformable and relational data. So here comes another question. How can we come together and how can we make this collective assemblage? And so we can bring more changes. To explore these questions, we'll look at co-speculative design approach. So co-speculative design is introduced by Gillian Lohman through her work, The Department of Seaweed. It takes collaborative approach where participants collectively imagine, speculate, and prototype potential futures. She collaborated with a diverse range of local community members, including museum visitors, scientists, and fellow designers. Her work explored how seaweed could be transformed into both a sustainable material and a medium for collective knowledge and actions, highlighting its potential as socially engaging resource for building sustainable futures. She adopted communities of practice from Wenger trainers, where viewed the collective learning as social and communities practice. It introduced three stages, which are engagement, participation, and reification. Based on this approach, Lohman reframes it towards more eco-social issue-centered and provides three phases: knowing, caring, and acting. Co-speculative design also incorporates collective imagination. So collective imagination is to bridge current reality and potential futures. It uses in-between and transitional space to trigger collective actions to intervene the current world through design practice and create multiple worlds that reflect diverse communities. So I combine this co-speculative design approach with transformable and relational data. So this is the combined model. So there is transformable data here, relational data here. So in this model, it starts with individual action and changes. And through social imaginary, it creates collective action and changes. And these collective actions can pressure or support government, industry, and organization. And then how we combine. So do you remember the plastic tracking kit? So we used that kit and made a connection to developing a co-speculative design called our Plastic Worlds game. So participants bring the completed kit to the workshop and use the reflections and experience from the kit to understand the broader connection and create actionable gestures. It uses three states from Lohman's work, which are knowing, caring, and acting. In the workshop, part one is knowing. So we developed the activity called Generating Plastic Knowledge through Webs of Connections. It's based on Librarians and Ingold concept measured. So as you can see, plastic is entangled with so many systems. Also, it's very involved in our daily life. So it's more social problem rather than environmental problem. And then, so through the part one activity, through the part one activity, participants understand these complex relationship between plastics and various systems, how these are tied to their daily life. It uses collective knowledge curves that contain various plastic issues, such as 90% of seabirds have plastic in their stomachs. Participants connect their plastic persona to knowledge cards, then to broader social, industrial, and ecological system, gaining insight into how their behaviors impact the whole system. This is how they played. The second part is caring and acting. It uses 12 caring principles. Inspired by these caring principles, participants develop their individual actions and imagine collective actions that apply what they learned and envision how they can act together towards building better sustainable communities. After creating collective actions, they also make concrete implementing and promoting scenario so that they can actually conduct their collective actions in their community. This is how they play. So far, we conducted this workshop in 4 cities. 225 citizen scientists participated. Around 55 collective actions have been made. These are some examples of collective actions they made. And this will be combining relational data with speculative design, which I've been currently developing. It will be combined with relationship building kit and non-human entity centers world building game. And I haven't researched yet, so I'll let you know when it's progress. Okay, so lastly, shortly, I still have 4 minutes. So I'm going to introduce one of our lab project called OFISH, Ocean Futures Imagination Station Hub. So we designed an installation piece near Forest Creek to explore how we can engage with the public through data and design practices and discuss issues of ocean futures. So do you know where Forest Creek is, right? It's near the main Street Science Station. So it has series of activities that invites visitors and passers. So it was mostly local legends, and we tried to gather them together and talk about issues around Forest Creek and how it relates to broader ocean futures and their daily life. So this was one of the activities called Forest Creek Observatory, a multi-species assembly. So now you know the meaning of assembly, right? So this map shows the complex relationships between human-made debris object and the marine life who live there or who used to live there. So we collected the data from several local experts, scientists, or knowledge keepers. So the shocking point of this map is the pink area. So the pink area is the past, and then blue area is the current. So in the past, it used to have so much more water here. This is the water used to be here. But after that, we blocked it to build factories and apartments. So what happened while we were doing that, we lost so many species. For example, salmon used to live there, but we can't see it anymore. So like this, the visitors learn this kind of issues around Forest Creek and start to see the connections to this issue to their life and also the past and present. And they engage with this conversation cause activity that encourage them to think about the relationship between the human-made objects and the species used to live in Forest Creek. For example, they imagine conversation between here, there's a washing machine and a salmon who used to live there, but we cannot see it anymore. Or the cargo ship and a harbor seal. And after that, they engage with future cards activity based on what they learn, they imagine about futures of first grade, think about how their individual and community actions are related to the first grade and broader ocean futures. So here, back to this chart, what was the role of visualization in this project? So we looked at the traditional way and then collective data visualization way. And here in this visualization, data collection was from local knowledge keepers. And the visualization was also to engage with local residents. So it was mutual, like both ways. Also, it was to increase dialogues and speculation around local issues that they are involved, and to imagine about how we can act to address those issues. So more interconnected way and mutual connection using visualization to think about the communist futures together. Okay, so I'm wrapping up my talk, posing these two questions to you. So what is data for you, and how can we use data for change? And yeah, that was my talk, and it's exactly 30 minutes. Thank you.
So much. Was that your defense? 30 minutes? Okay, so I can invite you both to sit here or not. It's completely up to you. Are there any questions that we want to ask right now? I do have one. Anyone else? No. Okay.
Let's let them sit down first. So yeah, thank you for the talk. That was really interesting. I'm very curious. So when Jihyun kind of like talked through the different models, how, I guess I was curious as to like how do those shapes come about? Like how do you decide like this is going to be a circle, this is going to be like a rectangle, this is connected this way? Like yeah.
Yeah, that's really common question that I used to get. What is harder to define what figure is about what it is. So I rely on my intuition a little bit. So maybe this figure is gonna be good to explain about this, or yeah, like that. Yeah.
Anyone else? Oh, this is off. Anyone else?
Yeah, thank you for the talks. They're really interesting. I was curious on the like fables for imagination project. If I know you shared like the anecdote with the son, but I wanted to hear a little bit more on like for the participants, what did they see as kind of the outcome or the impact that participating in that activity had?
Okay. Yeah, great question. I mean, we don't do what would be qualified as empirical research, so we don't interview people after. We're not interested in any of that kind of thing. But we do hear anecdotal conversations all the time. And often what we hear is that people are like, the thing we get the most, and actually Jihyun gets this too, it seems to happen all the time with our work, is people come into our work and they're like, this is never going to work. Like, I will never be able to write a fable about this. I will never be able to do a collective action on this, you know, and then they come out the end, they're like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I just wrote a fable. And it's like, this is really good. And like, I'm going to share this or whatnot. So like just the process themselves, they're very pleased with the fact they came out with something. And a lot of our work is very much grounded in this idea of making as being an integral component to this sort of building of futures literacies or fluencies or whatnot, that the making makes it real. It's one thing to sit and talk about something. It's another thing to actually make something and see it, like when it's there tangibly, to then realize that you've put something else in the world that fundamentally kind of rubs against the thing we're trying to contradict or sort of counter. And so we get a lot of that, but we also, like, people are really shocked when they're sitting, when you're listening to them in their groups. They have what is often talked about, which I find really interesting. We've had a couple times where they will really be surprised that they have shared experiences about something. Like, there was one group that we dealt with actually in Bilbao when we ran this, and they were talking about Zoom and Zoom coming about obviously during COVID. And one of them was a teacher in India who was teaching graphic design actually, but at the top of a hill, effectively, the university was. And many of the students didn't have internet connection. And so what she had realized is, as the sort of weeks went on, sort of a huge portion of the students stopped coming, and only the ones who had internet connection and were the wealthier ones were able to keep showing up. And so she wrote this really amazing story with her group around this kind of dragon and a monkey, and a pandemic hits. The dragon can keep flying around and the monkey gets tired, can't, and then, you know, the dragon sort of comes away with all the knowledge and the monkey sort of gets stuck in the forest. And we then ran another workshop later on, and it was a very similar story. So we actually shared the first fable with that group, and they were like, that is exactly how I feel about this. Like, why don't we have a better, like, why aren't we building these collectives together? And so we're getting a lot of that as well, about the surprise of the shared kind of intimacies that people are having with these technologies and with these devices, that they seem to be quite surprised, but also really comforted by the fact that there are multiple people thinking and feeling the same way, and that it's being kind of validated, but that they also feel agency about writing the stories about those particular things.
Hi, thank you. If I understand everything there, it's talking a little bit about the climate change, and I was looking at this bottle of water. So we have this change in climate. And also, if I understand, trying to bring the personal or the one person to another level. You know, this is what's happening in Vancouver, for example. Climate change happened, it's hot. And the city just take all of these bottles, plastic bottles, and distribute them everywhere with absolutely no problem for anybody to say. So we have a system that on one point is trying to change the individual, and we have a system in place that say collectively, you know what, it's hot, just have all of this bottle of water. So the small change we might have, maybe in Vancouver, I'm not sure, somewhere else, is this bottle are 10 cents, so they can bring it back directly to the recycle. But you can see the ambivalence of we have an issue with the climate. Everybody understands that at their level. But on the other way, big systems that already exist decide we have to save those people first and let's distribute what those people don't want. But they don't think about that because they want the water. So how will you change that? Which is certainly is not at the level, but at the level of the person or of one person, but at the level of an institution. But try to save the people that vote for them, pretty much.
Right. So that's why we need to have more power and at the individual level, right? So do you know the Trump is take back the plastic straws, right? So the police, we were practicing how to get rid of plastic straw, right? And at the individual level, we were practicing, and then all of a sudden the police got back. Maybe, I don't know, they didn't hear what we are practicing, or their understanding is different, or I don't know why, but we still know that plastic straws are painful for marine life there, right? So we still know that. So we don't have to, we can carry on our actions at the individual level. And then as we do more, we're gonna have more power. And then the governments, they are not gonna win, right? So we need to have more power. That's what I want to say, if you want to.
Perfect. Yeah, I mean, we get this question all the time, and it's that idea, it's that counter, or it's the constant sort of debate between the, should it be done from above? Like it's government and industry, they're the only ones who can make the change, should make people feel bad about the change, or vice versa. Individuals have to make the change and whatnot. I mean, I think it's both, right? I think change has to come from all spaces. One of the things that's really that has to be understood, and I think that's more where we're sort of intervening, is this idea that these are wicked problems. They are really complex. They are not going to be solved with one simple action, with one simple discipline, with one field, with one industry, with one anything. But what it is that complexity gets sort of black boxed out of any of our sort of daily colloquial understandings. And so, we don't necessarily even understand that the actions we're making are fundamentally sort of contradicting some of the things we actively care about. And so it's about building those kind of literacies so that publics can have a better sense of what's going on, be able to ask the right questions. We ask all the time, and you can see this, plastic is the problem. Plastic's not the problem. I will be the first to say plastics is the problem. Plastics is an amazing material, being an industrial designer, but we don't use it for what it's for. We use it for mass disposability. We use it for single use. Plastic is not its properties. Its properties are incredibly long time, very, very strong, malleable material that we have developed to use it in this other way. So if we change that and we go, okay, no more plastic straws, let's make bioplastic straws. What happens? Well, then we wipe out entire farms that used to be used for making corn, and we now feed industry and mass disposability with it. So we get our bioplastic forks, we can feel good about it, but we've starved out an entire population. Those are the complexities within these issues. And we're trying to, subtly and slowly kind of build up a better understanding of all of those large scale kind of systemic issues and how they're all kind of entangled, so that we can actually ask better questions. We can have a better sense of what, when we're doing one thing, what is the world that we're creating, we're being a part of. We don't always have the choices. And sometimes people need the plastic bottles, and I'm not going to sort of contradict them, but it is about more building up those kind of more or complex sensitivities to things. We don't teach how to think in complex ways. And so people want that linear, simple X equals Y. But that's not how the world works. So we're trying to intervene in those ways.
Thank you.
Hi, that was lovely. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump right to the question. So there's all the stuff you talked about, and then there's the practice that you're using, right? So who are the experts? Who gets to participate? What is data? What is information? And like for me, I didn't go to school for a long time. So for a person like me, you know what I mean? I didn't fit into this mold. And so one of the many things I love about your talk is that it's a sport. So I'm curious, part of this also is like, how are we reimagining what the institution of education is, and how that operates, and how that extends, how people are kind of included in that process. It seems to me, whether it's the data or the actual practice of imagining together, that you're kind of hacking at the understands of how school actually works, which is awesome. But like, I'm just, I'm curious how many comments I'm going to for your institution.
I actually have a whole talk on that.
Okay.
Have time.
Breaking in or breaking the institution. But yeah, and I mean, I think it's about, I don't know, it's about disrupting those taken for granted, very simplified umbrella ideas of what institutions need to be and who belongs and who doesn't belong. And that's like Apatorai talks about the rights to research. Another one of my favorite colleagues, Walker Cooler, who's in Gothenburg, talks about the rights to design. And it's this idea that, we have really, the stories we tell do a very good job of excluding, right? It makes people feel like they don't belong. But we tell those stories, and we tell those stories so that people don't belong. And so what stories do we need to tell? And it's not that we need to be telling those stories. It's how do we give people the comfort, the agency, their own sort of, I don't know, like sense of self, so to realize that they can tell their own stories and that their stories are equally as important, if not more important, because that's actually where possibility and change exists. Because this thing has been doing the exact same thing forever, and it will not change because it's about power and money. And, you know, it's the hyper capitalist beast that we live in, the hyper individualized. That's what they want us. They want us to all walk around individually, only thinking about ourselves, not understanding that we are always in relation to everything else. And so it's these other stories, these hidden stories that are actually the more important ones and the ones where we can really do a lot of learning. And so that's sort of where we sit, is how do we actually work with people? How do we develop methods to extend the rights of research and the rights to information into the public sphere?
So I often feel that the academic field and community is quite far. It's very distant. So I usually try to have some exercise in the community outside of the class, but sometimes I don't want to go out. You know, I want to study here, right? So, but actually, the answer is not here. The answer is outside. Because that's why we are here to learn. We are here to make something with them, for them, right? So why are we just stuck inside and studying here? We are just making our own imagination world here. So I believe we need to go out, interact with community people, and make something with them, so that it can have so that between the academic community sector it can be blended.
Touching back, how would you say is like the process on tackling those challenges that without you like inserting your own bias, that storytelling, like how, like, I want to learn like more about how the process is into giving that agency to people using data like interactively to also make a change or that.
Okay, so let's see if I understood. So so we are biased, right? So everyone, when they create something, or when they do something, everything is biased. It's heavily rely on myself. So there is no exist such an objective thing. So we just need to adapt that, right? So okay, so everything is biased. So then it becomes just very subject matter, right? So everyone's idea, their reflection, their thought become very important. So what I'm trying to do is then how we can capture those things, like through data practice or design practice. So does it answer your question?
I can add a little bit to that. So I mean, a lot of the work that is done across anywhere in the lab is like, it takes us ages to make these things, like ridiculous amounts of time, because we make it, we test it, we make it, we test it, we make it, we test it, we make it before it ever sees the public. Because that's the one thing that I'm very, very serious about, is that the public is not there to test our materials, right? Like, it's not, they have other things, lots of, important time, whatever. So we have to make sure that by the time it gets into their hands, it is like a well-oiled wheel. It works. We know that it's going to do what it needs to do, and it's not going to get in the way. And a lot of it works. We have methods that we do all the time. So we write down all our assumptions about how things will work, and then it's on the table. And then every time we go into, then we're like, are we falling into any of these assumptions? How are we doing? We do all that. We do maps of who we have to visit. Who are all the publics that are fundamentally connected to this issue? are we accounting for all of them? What are the tropes that they're familiar with? How do we actually, use one of those tropes to design it in a way that they're going to feel comfortable using it? And like, it's just that consistent, constant back and forth to make sure that we don't fall prey to what we assume the public is going to know or feel comfortable with or whatnot. Sometimes we fail and then we learn from those and then those go back into our methods moving forward. But it's a very long, arduous process. But
And through this process, participants start to aware that they have the agency. Right? Oh, I can talk here, and then it's working. So it's kind of practice with them as well to how to make the voice. Okay.
Anyone else? Okay, I do have a question. I was waiting at the end because it has just tangentially, it has to do with both your talks, but it's more about mentorship. And I'm very curious about how mentorship looks like, specifically with regards to novel methods and the introduction of new methodologies. And because I mean, these are design methodologies and they're not necessarily easy to mentor. And you happen to be right now mentoring mentee. By the way, that's how I would describe it. And by the way, you just mentioned that you just defended your proposal. Comprehensive. Fantastic. Congratulations. So anyway, do you mind talking about this the mentorship process and how it feels from both sides?
I don't mind talking about it. I'm not sure I have anything to say. I don't know what I like. It's an interesting question. Yes, these are all like, that's the thing. None of our methods, there's no one size fits all. It always looks different depending on the topic, the public, the whatnot, because we always use familiar tropes so that's situated. There's a certain things like scaffolding is a big thing that happens in the lab, and we definitely teach people how to do that. But I run it like a design studio. So we're just always there all together, bouncing ideas off of each other. We don't work separately in silos, just in the studio space. Help each other's projects. We run our own projects. We kind of build things in. We bring other people in from other departments, disciplines, and fields, and work with them. Yeah, the mentoring. I mean, I don't know. It's a good question because I also don't write about my work that much. And we do get a lot of those questions too, but we just tend to do. But one of the big things we're doing right now, because all of the tools we develop are meant to be open access, but what is very difficult about a lot of these things is they actually require me to be in the room. Because there's a huge level of tacit knowledge that has grown as this has grown. And so we're trying to figure out now, how do you write instructions that encompass tacit knowledge so that we don't have to be there, so that actually people can download these things, alter them, change them, and would understand how to change them based on their own situations, their own topics and whatnot, but they would become useful to them as kind of, as again, just like a framework to design off of. But that's where we're at right now. And I think that is kind of the same thing with mentoring. I feel like it's a tacit thing that I don't 100% know what we do, but it seems really great.
Okay. So, well, one of the things that I think very important is relationship between mentor and mentee. We work together. So, well, she didn't teach me like, hey, use this method for this, use this and this. But we work together. So in that process, what is important is like I learn her perspective, I learn her mind, I learn how she thinks rather than intellectual property. So then I apply those her mindset, perspective, or ways of thinking, ways of working, and apply that into my research. So I think that's more important than just learning some knowledge from papers or that is particularly in this kind of work. Yeah.
Need to answer my question. Anyone else? No? Okay. Thank you so much for being here. You have no idea how much I'm grateful to both of you, and I will clap. But for that, I need to leave the microphone.
Thank you.